Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, here to help you fall asleep with these chilling horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is, so feel free to leave a comment. When you're ready, get comfortable and relax. It all started. My grandfather, Henry Miller, passed away last week. Although he was rarely physically present in my life, missing my little league games and even my college graduation, he was always there in spirit. He'd call me every week from his remote cabin in northern Maine, reminding me how much he missed me while recounting his weekly escapades deep in the forests and bogs of that rugged region. Henry was an indefatigable man who, even in retirement, refused to slow down. He had built himself a secluded retreat on the edge of civilization, a place as remote as it was enigmatic. Nestled in a small, time-worn town called Pine Hollow, not far from the tumultuous Atlantic coast, he constructed a modest wooden house with his own calloused hands. It was his sanctuary, a home where he could live among nature and the whispered legends of old American lore. I remember how his eyes would light up when he announced the house was finished. He even mailed me the blueprint so that I could design a little room of my own for when I visited. He had loved me from afar, and it was unthinkable that he could be gone so suddenly. They say he took his own life, they whispered, but I couldn't accept that. I felt deep in my soul that Henry had one last message for me. He wanted me to see his retreat, to be there with him. He wanted to live on, and I had to uncover why someone, or something, wanted to silence him. In his final will, he left me the house. And so, I set off for Pine Hollow. When I arrived, reality surpassed the faded photographs he had sent me over the years. The house Henry built in that isolated spot exuded a quiet, almost sacred dignity. It stood at the end of a winding gravel road, where the soft soil of the town abruptly gave way to craggy granite outcrops, and the view stretched out over the endless, stormy Atlantic. Built by his own hands, this house was both his legacy and his fortress. The air carried the brine of the sea mixed with the earthy scent of moss, pine needles, and old wood. The heavy timber facade seemed to sigh with every gust, as if burdened by the secrets of generations. Its tall, narrow windows allowed just enough light to turn the rooms into a mysterious twilight. The glass, slightly warped by time, lending the outside world an almost spectral quality. Through these panes, the distant roar of the Atlantic could be heard, evoking memories of tempestuous coastal nights. Inside, creaking wooden floors groaned underfoot in rooms that hadn't been walked on in years. Once elegant wallpaper, reminiscent of a bygone era in mid-century America, peeled away in long, curling strips. One room in particular drew my attention. My grandfather's study, a room he had always kept locked. It was where he spent most of his days, and I suspected it held a secret. On quiet nights, when the house slumbered, I swore I could hear the soft rustle of turning pages, as if Henry's journals were still speaking to me. Within days of my arrival, I realized that Pine Hollow harbored mysteries far deeper than I had imagined. Locals never spoke openly about Henry or his house. Their eyes would narrow at the mention of his name, and their smiles came out as strained, as if guarding a dreadful secret. Whenever I broached the subject of his past, conversation turned suddenly chilly, as though they were determined to keep the truth hidden. At night, the wind relentlessly battered the creaking walls, and through the cracks came a whisper, a murmur reminiscent of Native American legends and old ritualistic practices of early settlers. I tried to convince myself that it was merely the house settling, but sometimes, lying awake, I felt I was not alone, as if an ancient presence had always dwelled within. my first suspicion fell on the study. I sensed that room held the key to Henry's hidden truths. It was where he had spent countless hours poring over books and local folklore, researching mysterious rituals said to have roots deep in the early, troubled days of America's wilderness. I searched the entire house for a mysterious key, but my efforts proved frustratingly fruitless. On a stormy night, rain lashing mercilessly against the windows and thunder splitting the darkness, I found myself in the kitchen, clutching a glass of aged bourbon. My mind raced. Should I force open the enchanted study? Then my gaze caught a hidden hatch in the ceiling, previously unnoticed, leading to the attic. The attic was sparsely furnished. Only a few old pieces of furniture and relics of bygone days lay there. Yet something drew my attention. A faded, yellowed photograph in a plain frame. It depicted me as a small child, with Henry leaning down affectionately over me, his hand gently resting on my head. He wore a worn blue work shirt and faded jeans, and a silver bracelet glinted on his wrist, a piece he'd cherished all his life. That solitary photograph made it abundantly clear. My grandfather had wanted me to find it. In a moment of overwhelming emotion, I accidentally dropped the frame, shattering it. Among the scattered glass shards, I discovered something unexpected. A small rusted key and a handwritten note on the back of the photo, inscribed in an old-fashioned script. Hidden secrets await until the truth sets them free. Torn by a mix of anger, sorrow, and hope, I rushed to the study, a room that felt like a silent archive of America's shadowy past. Shelves bowed under the weight of countless books, and in the dusty shafts of light, symbols of old rituals danced on the walls. Amidst the diaries and yellowed newspaper clippings, I found Henry's detailed records. On several pages, there were cryptic references to secret meetings, gatherings with mysterious figures whose names were foreign to me. Repeatedly, the same intricate symbols appeared, reminiscent of snowflake patterns distorted by time. The final pages of his journal held a pivotal clue. Henry wrote of a clandestine meeting at the outskirts of civilization, where a ritual intended to awaken forgotten forces was planned, and of a man named William Blackwood, reputed as a mediator between worlds. On the day of his death, it appeared these associates had set in motion the events that led to his demise. I realized then, those who gathered in the shadows of Pine Hollow had silenced him to protect a secret long buried in America's dark history. That night brought more questions than answers, and the image of the old photograph haunted me. In it, I was an innocent child, and Henry, tenderly ruffling my hair, a memory that both warmed and pained me. My mother's words echoed in my mind. Your grandfather was more than just an old man. He had a mission that you'll understand when you're older. But that promise had always remained hidden, and now, with his tragic death, I knew I had to unearth the truth. The next day, needing fresh air and clarity, I ventured into Pine Hollow. The town lay in a region where the cold Atlantic winds met the dense, whispering pines, a collision of nature that had weathered countless storms. The houses, built of weathered wood and rusted tin, seemed steeped in history and secret stories. As I strolled along a narrow side street, I sensed I was being watched. A man in a dark hoodie, his face shrouded in shadow, trailed me. His steps were uneven, as if he carried a burden of secrets. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but soon it became unmistakable. He was following me. When I turned into a narrow alley, his presence grew more distinct, and then, in the pitch-black darkness, he suddenly grabbed me with brutal force, pinning me against the rough red brick wall of an abandoned farmhouse. "Listen, miss," he hissed, pressing his hand over my mouth and wrapping his arm tightly around my neck. His eyes darted anxiously along the alley before he added in a trembling tone, "You shouldn't have been digging." Then, before I could ask any questions, he released me and melted into the darkness. I clutched my bruised neck, uncertain whether his assault was a cry for help or a dire warning. But deep inside, I knew I had to follow his cryptic advice, even if it meant venturing down a dangerous path. With my heart pounding, I made my way to the old cemetery on the outskirts, a place locals avoided as if it were cursed. Every sense was on high alert. The mysterious encounter had left me shaken. From the grimy windows of shuttered houses, wary glances followed my every step. Faces half hidden behind calloused hands, as though they feared being seen. The closer I got, the more clearly ancient symbols etched into the wet earth emerged. The very same motifs I had seen in my grandfather's study. Among the crumbling headstones, a small blood-red smear glimmered in the orange dusk. Then I saw it. A freshly disturbed grave, where my grandfather's remains lay, shattered into patterns reminiscent of distorted, snowflake-like shapes. The realization struck me like a sledgehammer. Henry had been sacrificed in a dark, ritualistic ceremony. Tears streamed down my face as I knelt beside the crooked, weathered hands of the man I once adored. The sight filled me with a seething mixture of grief and rage. It was as though the entire town, the reticent, suspicious locals, had conspired in his death. I knew then I was entangled in a web of dark family secrets, and I had to flee. Summoning every ounce of strength, I sprinted back to my grandfather's cabin. The gravel path was now marked with mysterious symbols, crudely carved into the hillside during my absence. From the shadowed forest, I heard the same hooded man's voice again. "You're too late. It's all been decided. Don't go any further." He crouched behind thick pine boughs and vanished into the darkness, leaving me trembling with terror. Once inside the cabin, I hurriedly gathered my few belongings and returned to the study. There, tucked into a recessed niche beside the door, I found a dusty jewelry box. Inside lay my grandfather's silver bracelet, a cherished memento he'd worn since my childhood. As I turned the bracelet over in my hand, I noticed a delicate engraving, a tiny snowflake, the familiar mark that had always reminded me of him. Before I could ponder its significance further, a loud knock resounded at the front door. My heart pounding, I drew aside the heavy curtains and peered out into the night. Under the weak glow of a street lamp, I saw something unthinkable. Flames licking at the edge of the forest, and a group of figures, men, women, and even children, gathered around the cabin. Their eyes glinted coldly in the firelight as they chanted in an eerie, archaic melody. It hit me suddenly. I hadn't locked the door. Then a new voice spoke from behind me. "The debt is paid." A vicious blow struck my head, and darkness swallowed me. When I regained consciousness, I found myself bound to an old wooden table in a sparsely furnished dining room. Blood had crusted over my left eye, forcing it shut, and every part of my body trembled with pain. I was dressed in a plain, white dress, barefoot and utterly helpless. All around, the grim locals stood, their faces a mix of fanatical fervor and grim determination, dousing the room with gasoline as if preparing for a dark ceremony. A hulking man, his build reminiscent of an impenetrable fortress, stepped forward. Bare-chested, his massive yet corpulent frame exuded an unsettling power, and his eyes burned with a wild, feverish light. Slowly, he approached, a smile both innocent and sinister playing on his lips as he caressed my cheek. "You never heard your grandfather tell you, did you? How important you are to us all," he murmured in a heavy, almost otherworldly accent. Overcome with rage, I bit down fiercely on his hand, You vile devils, you murdered him." He seemed genuinely taken aback by my defiance. "No, my dear, Henry sacrificed himself. He did it for you, for all of us." With a chilling calm, he reached for an object on the massive oak table, a grotesque ring that seemed to writhe and pulse as if it were alive. Crafted from rough, blackened bone with jagged protrusions and dark, pulsating veins, the ring was so enormous it encircled my head completely. When he forced it onto me, the cold metal dug painfully into my flesh. A scream tore from my throat as the ring latched onto me like a curse. "Our Savior approaches," the hulking man intoned in a deep, resonant voice. Outside, the gathered townsfolk began shedding their clothes, men, women, and even children discarding their garments carelessly near the doorway. After the last of them had vanished, someone dropped a match onto the pile. In moments, my grandfather's cabin erupted into an inferno. The fire raged mercilessly, the choking smoke stifling every breath. Yet, amid the chaos, I struggled desperately to survive. The ropes binding me began to melt in the searing heat, and in a surge of panicked strength, I managed to loosen several knots. But the cursed ring clung stubbornly to my head. I had to escape. I had to fight. Then, I felt it, a sinister presence spreading within me. It was as if a shadow of cold fire crept along my spine and under my skin. Over the roaring blaze, a dark, humanoid figure seemed to materialize. A burned, disfigured man whose tattered flesh and crazed eyes spoke of madness and despair. With trembling legs, I tried to rise, but the agony and the unnatural chill of this presence left my thoughts scattered. Suddenly, the grotesque figure lunged at me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and fought with every ounce of strength against this unearthly intruder. But he was overpowering. His claws tore into my ribs and sank mercilessly into my throat. My mouth dried up, and in a moment that felt eternal, I tasted decay as the air thickened around me. I realized that this demon sought not only to claim my body, but to possess my very soul. A burning, searing pain exploded within me as the demon began its invasion. A maelstrom of darkness igniting an uncontrollable fire within, imbuing me with an unearthly strength. I fought with every fiber of my being, wrestling to reclaim control. But the demon, relentless and wild, burrowed ever deeper into me, fracturing my thoughts until I felt the last vestiges of myself shatter. Then, in a moment of excruciating clarity, I understood. I had to turn this dark force against itself. With one final, desperate cry, I let the demon spread, yet not as it intended. I summoned every ounce of strength and hurled myself into the raging flames, as if I could transform into a weapon of my own making. The pain, the heat, and the burning fury coalesced, empowering me to seize control of the demonic influence. When I finally emerged from the smoldering ruins, marked forever by fire, I saw the cult gathered on their knees before the burning cabin. Their faces were twisted with grief and madness, and as they beheld me, their silent screams were swallowed by the inferno. For a fleeting moment, a grim smile touched my lips. I knew they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had believed they were unleashing a demon within me, but instead, it had only made me stronger. I ran until my feet bled and the pain faded into numbness. At the edge of the charred town, amid the damp, whispering forests of Pine Hollow, I left behind those shadowy figures and their dark cult. I ran until I found shelter in an abandoned farmhouse, a new sanctuary offering a final refuge. For the cabin that Henry Miller built at the edge of the known world was not merely his inheritance. It was a shrine, a throne awaiting me. In the quiet shadows of America's rugged wilderness, among ancient pines and along storm-lashed coasts, The secrets of the past endured. And now, with that dark legacy coursing within me, I knew I possessed the power to command those age-old mysteries, and, in doing so, to shape the future. Did you do it? Did you send it off? Mark leaned casually against my desk in our cramped office at the old family business, a company that had been passed down for generations in Detroit. He raised an eyebrow as he spoke. I was only going to toss it in the mailbox, I mumbled, struggling to remember what I'd told him earlier. It just seemed like a waste of time to drive to the post office. She'll get it anyway. Mark nodded slowly. Marriage is tough, you know. How long have you two been together? 16 years, I replied. Mark whistled under his breath. That's a long time. We even had to go to couples counseling. Nothing too serious, but it helps when you start seeing each other as, I don't know, human beings again. Sharing little secrets helps reopen the lines of communication. His point wasn't without merit, and I nodded in reluctant agreement, even though I didn't want my boss getting involved in my personal problems. It was supposed to be private. Yet somehow he always knew when things were going awry for me, and which homework assignments our therapist had given us remained a mystery. Listen, I began, gesturing half-heartedly toward my computer. I still have work to do. What did you write? He interrupted. What was your secret? The question caught me off guard, and my face betrayed my surprise, but Mark seemed unperturbed. Come on, tell me, he pressed. I decided to lie. I wrote that I wasn't really a fan of her cooking, even though I pretend to be. Please, he scoffed, rolling his eyes. We both know she never cooks anyway. I started, but he cut me off. That's the thing about marriage, he said, suddenly pulling up an empty chair and sitting so close that our knees brushed. You have to learn to trust one another, beyond all the details. Imagine this. You haven't yet received her first secret. You might wonder if she'd mail it to you like the exercise calls for, or if one morning she'd simply leave it on the kitchen table, or hand it to you personally without any fuss. But really, it doesn't matter, does it? You have to trust that she'll deliver. That trust is the bond between you. So why worry about the how or why? Just trust that she will. His proximity allowed me to see the sweat beading on his forehead. No, I stammered. Think of it like this, he continued. I've got an elegant, cream-colored envelope right here. He produced one about the size of a playing card. In flawless handwriting, my name was written on the front in my wife's script. Gently, Mark placed it on my lap. He moved to stand, but paused mid-step, leaning in until his face was almost touching mine. I've had this in my desk since the day I hired you, he said, with a self-satisfied smirk. Then, without another word, he turned and walked down the hall. I was utterly perplexed and uneasy, but not yet truly afraid. I opened the envelope and read the words inside. Unlike you, Mark never had a choice. What the hell? I muttered, rising to confront my boss. I found him in his office by the glass doors leading to the terrace. He looked at me and beckoned me over before opening the doors and stepping out into the cool night air. Then he started jogging, and, like a swimmer leaping off a cliff, he dove headfirst over the railing. They spread a heavy-duty rubber mat over what little of him remained. I wondered if someday someone with special equipment would have to come to retrieve my boss from the street. For now, though, he couldn't simply be bagged up, not in his state, and certainly not all at once. Honestly, I think it'd be best if you didn't drive home yourself tonight. A stern policewoman approached. In her early 40s, her bright yellow jacket made her deep-set eyes and thin mouth all the more striking. I found it hard to meet her gaze. you've been through quite a bit," she said. "Am I required to give a statement?" I asked, my voice hoarse and trembling, helpless and scared like a child after a tantrum. "The CCTV footage is pretty clear," she explained. "We might call you later, but right now we're treating it as a suicide. The most important thing is that you're okay. Do you have someone you can call?" Her eyes fell on the wedding band on my finger. "No," I said firmly. "I need to see a doctor first." "That's wise," the officer replied. "You look like you're in shock." She put an arm around me and led me to her squad car, a garish yellow behemoth that looked almost surreal in our Midwestern suburb. Ever since I was a kid, I'd hidden behind bushes whenever I saw a car like that, tossing empty soda cans on the ground. Climbing into the back seat felt wrong, but I let her guide me gently into the front seat, feeling strangely grateful. In that moment, I wished only that the world might finally start to make sense again. She exuded a calm as if she'd seen it all and knew exactly what to do. No sooner had she turned the key than a torrential rain began to fall. I thought of Mark's remains, dissolving in the downpour, like raspberry sorbet washing away down a storm drain, and I shut my eyes to block the images out. "Are you sure you have no one to call?" the officer asked again as she adjusted the rearview mirror to get a better look at me. My wife's on a business trip," I lied. "I'll call her after I see the doctor. I don't want to worry her for nothing." She paused, considering my words. It's hard having a spouse who's always on the road. My husband, when he was home, was often so distant, quiet, disinterested. With the kids, he was reliable, but when it was just us, he'd withdraw. I nodded, unwilling and unable to continue the conversation. He was a good man, but not much of an emotional guy. If I had someone like him, it'd probably be the same, she murmured, then fell silent, staring out into the rain. Unbidden, my thoughts drifted to the secret family affairs hidden in the old factories of my wife's family. The abandoned dairy plant, once the heart of our regional enterprise, had become a dark legacy, provoking questions best left unasked. With a sigh, I recalled the envelope in my pocket. When I took it out again, I saw the same chilling words. "Unlike you, Mark never had a choice." "What the hell?" I whispered, rising again to look for my boss, only to discover that he had vanished from his office, his silhouette barely visible in the glow of the railing lights. I hurried after him, but when I finally caught sight of him, he was plunging headfirst into a river of memories, swallowed by the dark current of the past. The next day, still trembling and dazed, I sat in the modest cafeteria of the family business when another unsettling encounter unfolded. The policewoman, her stern gaze fixed on me since our first meeting, spoke once more. "I really think you shouldn't drive yourself today." I nodded silently as she handed me that same bright yellow jacket, a symbol of protection and also a stark contrast to the darkness that had overtaken my life. "The surveillance cameras caught everything. You can rest assured nothing is being covered up," she said firmly, as rain lashed against the grimy windows outside. I remembered the words from the envelope. "Unlike you, Mark never had a choice." What did it mean? And why did it seem as though someone, or something, was always working in the background? With the police on my tail and a creeping fear of the dark family secrets that had long defined our existence, I found myself drawn, against my will, to the abandoned dairy plant on the outskirts of Detroit. Once the centerpiece of our family business, the building now stood as a relic. Weathered brick, shattered windows, and faded graffiti in rosewood letters bearing our old family name. A remnant poised to spill decades of hidden truths at any moment. "Hello? Is anyone here?" I called out in the gloomy courtyard. thunder rumbling over the old smokestacks as rain seeped through every crack. I stepped cautiously onto the broken floor tiles, almost smelling spilled milk and aged grime, a scent that stirred memories of long-forgotten childhoods in our small Midwestern town. Inside, I discovered an abandoned production area, an old conveyor belt, scattered trolleys that once carried milk bottles, shards of broken glass crunching underfoot. Overhead loomed a former office, its access blocked by a collapsed metal staircase, a mysterious, forbidden place that still exuded the aura of bygone power. As I wandered deeper into the space, I encountered cryptic graffiti scrawled on the walls. "They hate the light." The words bored into my heart, leaving me cold. Was this "they" the same as the "she" mentioned in the letter? I looked to the side and saw a rusted metal ladder leading up to a hidden door. A small scrap of bright yellow fabric dangled from the handle, a clue that both fascinated and frightened me. "Is anyone there?" I called out again, more desperately this time. My steps carried me over toppled cardboard boxes and old filing cabinets, which formed a makeshift barrier against the secrets of the place. I carefully climbed over the debris until I reached a long, shadowy corridor with faded wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights that cast eerie shadows. One door after another creaked open. In one room, I found a dilapidated office decorated in 1970s style. Crumbling plaster, exposed cables, and heaps of plastic bags filled with copper wires. In one corner, a massive safe stood with its door ajar, inviting me to peer inside. Curiosity overcame me, and I opened it. Behind the safe was a hollow chamber leading into a secret tunnel that descended into an earthen abyss. The walls, propped up by rotted wooden beams, whispered stories of a long-forgotten era. "Forget it," I muttered softly, closing the safe and continuing on. The further I ventured into the dark corridors of the deserted building, the stronger a putrid smell invaded my nostrils, sour and stagnant, like spilled milk on the pavement. Every fiber of my being rebelled against the rational mind, and panic seized me. The oppressive atmosphere froze me in place until suddenly, a barricaded door creaked open just a crack. Something lurked behind it, and my mind flashed terrible images. A gruesome altar, a blood-stained stretcher, and even Mark, broken, trampled, almost crumpled to pulp, wearing a terrified smile that would haunt me forever. What forces could drive a man to such desperate acts? Before the door could open any further, I chose to run. With trembling hands, I slipped into the secret tunnel behind the safe, hoping to escape the gaze of the dark forces that seemed to hold sway over everything here. The tunnel was only about 50 meters long, yet every step felt like a descent into an ancient chasm. At its end, I emerged into a room whose stone walls recalled an ancient temple, massive, cold, and unyielding. Against one wall, a pile of old-school backpacks in hues of lavender, pink, green, yellow, and red was stacked high. Whoever once owned a backpack styled after a beloved video game character must have long since grown up, even if in a most brutal, cut-off way. A narrow beam of light seeped in through a grated vent in the ceiling. Summoning every ounce of courage, I began to clamber over the teetering heap of backpacks, each step a battle against gravity and the thickening stench that nearly stole my breath. Behind me, a foul odor crept closer until I staggered out into the fresh night air, drenched in sweat and blinking back tears. Barely outside, I found myself only a few yards from the entrance of the old dairy plant. Parked next to my car was the policewoman's squad car, its headlights now switched on as dusk settled in. Without hesitation, I jumped in, this time taking the driver's seat, and started the engine. But before I could drive off, I noticed something on the passenger seat, another letter. I picked it up without drawing too much attention. It read, "I know what they're capable of, and a few kids is a small price to pay." The thought of that pile of school bags made me shudder as I slipped the letter into my pocket. Later, in the dim light of an old-fashioned doctor's office in downtown Detroit, Dr. Jansen, a gruff, older man, muttered as he administered an injection, "I'm just giving you a shot. Nothing more than a little scratch. Just tell me what happened." "I got tossed into a dumpster," I said softly. Without much reaction, he removed the needle cap with his teeth and jabbed the needle into my arm. "How's your girl, Sifi?" he asked while cleaning my arm with a cotton swab. "Pretty much okay, I think. You've known her since you were a kid, right?" "What were her parents like?" "Cool, witty, smart." "Just like Sifi," I replied, earning a brief nod of confirmation. After administering the injection, he turned to his cluttered desk piled high with crumpled papers and scribbled something on a form with a scratchy pen. Outside, the rain battered the windows as if forecasting the swollen rivers of our industrial Midwest. "You don't have any fractures," he eventually said. "At this point, I think some water and sleep will do you good." "I'll take care of that," I managed, feeling utterly immobilized. My path now seemed to lead only away from this nightmare. "Should I call you a cab?" he asked. I saw someone die today," I stuttered. "He killed himself." "Oh, I see." The doctor nodded, as though everything suddenly made sense. "Was that at your company? I saw the news. They brought him in for an autopsy." "What?" "Yeah, they took him for a post-mortem exam. This clinic mostly handles the city's deceased. Only a few private patients come here, thanks to Sifi being on the list." A heavy silence fell as I looked around the dim, poorly lit office, a space that reminded me of the grim, hidden chambers of old mansions that never fully saw the light. "Maybe I can help you," Dr. Jansen finally offered. "Give me a few minutes and I'll see what I can do." "What?" I began, but he abruptly left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I waited as seconds stretched into minutes. It felt as though I were a fly caught in a spider's web, helpless and trapped while the spider busied itself elsewhere. Eventually, I stood up, unable to sit still any longer, and noticed a cream-colored envelope on his disheveled desk. My name written in my wife's unmistakable handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. The note read, "They can take everything from us at any time. Our cooperation isn't needed. You only act out of pleasure." Suddenly, memories of the tunnel, the horrifying image of Mark, and all the painful visions of that night flooded back. Green, pulsating blood, pallid white, and a ghostly shadow settling into the dark corners of my mind. And then came a voice, deep and relentless. "Do you want to come with me?" Dr. Jansen stood behind the door. Ignoring the letter in my hand, he said in a tone that was both seductive and threatening, "Do you have a choice?" "No," I whispered as I allowed him to lead me away. He offered me a pill, and together we ran through endless corridors that twisted like a labyrinth through the clinic, a facility reminiscent of the grim bunkers of old. Finally, we reached a small room with a massive metal door. When he flung it open with both hands, a blast of icy air hit me. Beyond was a walk-in freezer crammed with hazmat suits, reminiscent of those worn in chemical spill situations, and countless masks displaying ghostly pale faces. He didn't let his eyes leave mine as he held up one of the suits. "Don't look away." On the front of the suit was the image of a young woman, probably in her 20s, with a delicate scar across her chest, bloodstains around her eyes, and a slit running from her neck to her lower back. The ability to pack something as large as a minibus into such a small space is centuries beyond your understanding. he continued, turning the suit over and pointing at the blood-red underside of its peeling skin with a dismissive gesture. For us, it's as primitive as a rope. My mouth went dry as I felt pieces of myself beginning to crumble. Without changing his shape, his face contorted into something both human and monstrous. A disconcerting, almost spectral grin, reminiscent of a deranged Cheshire cat. "Persephone wished for you to remain unscathed," he said, his voice echoing with the ticking of time and the bitterness of bygone generations. "But deals aren't struck by proxies, and she doesn't have the authority to speak for us. Your worth to us is unmistakable. We use your family's assets to extract flesh, skin, and pain from this decaying world. So why should we grant you the same protection we give her, especially now that you've been snooping into our affairs?" A dark halo seemed to surround him as his human form dissolved into shadows, leaving only his glowing eyes and a mocking, twisted grin. A few steps back, I sensed the door behind me slowly swinging open. Was I fast enough to escape, or was I already too entangled in these sinister dealings? "By the way," he added in a voice that rumbled like crushed rock, "the question wasn't rhetorical." With a forceful shove, I slammed the freezer door closed and locked it from the outside. I stepped back, waiting for the ominous clamor of the creature. But instead, only a low, mocking laugh filled the room. The clinic itself seemed infinitely vast inside. Endless corridors, cold metal walls, and tables laid out with sharp instruments that promised pain with a mere glance. Though the facility was nearly empty, fleeting shadows darted by, and eerie footsteps drove me to scurry into adjacent rooms where I had to hide. The few nurses and orderly staff moved almost mechanically, as if they belonged to a world where trust was a forgotten concept. In one room that resembled a dog shelter, with rows of cages that seemed to hold not dogs but heaps of colored markers clutched in their bars, I suddenly realized that something was very wrong. Memories of gloomy mansions and dilapidated villas, where old money dictated its own rules, flooded my mind. I couldn't afford to linger in such thoughts. I thought of the doctor's ominous question, and, for the first time since that horrific day, I longed to see my wife. Perhaps she could offer a spark of protection amid this twisted conspiracy. Then I noticed on a massive door a bronze plaque engraved with these words: "Those who dwell in darkness love you." The exact same words that had been scrawled in the factory, only this time they were carved on a heavy plate attached to the door. I pushed the door open and entered a room that resembled a morgue. Rows of metal compartments where old bodies lay stored. In the center stood an iron table with ropes fastened to it as if binding prisoners. From the hall, I heard muffled voices and the creaking of footsteps. A young woman was softly sobbing as two orderlies grabbed her wrists. With no apparent escape, and thankfully, the men remained engrossed in their work. I had no choice but to step into the room and desperately search for a hiding place. As the footsteps and her stifled cries grew louder, it became clear they were headed straight for this room. In one final desperate act, I opened one of the metal compartments. Inside, I was met with the sight of a few disemboweled skeletal feet. "Damn it," I muttered. I tried another, then another, until I finally found one that was empty. Cautiously, I climbed inside, stifling a gag as the rank, aged fluid on the floor nearly overwhelmed me. The compartment had just been vacated, so without wasting time, I squeezed into the claustrophobic space, like a coffin, and closed the lid just enough so it wouldn't fully shut. Just in time, I heard the door swing open and the men drag the young woman in, quickly strapping her down. Only after she disappeared did her muffled screams resume. I helped her out of the compartment and whispered, "Be quiet. If you make a sound, they'll come." Her desperate words were drowned out by the pounding footsteps, and my heart raced. When I reopened the compartment later, I found her lying motionless, eyes closed and finally silent. Ever since I'd first seen her, her crying had never ceased. Now, in that hellish silence, she seemed as if she'd come straight from the depths of hell, barely escaping its clutches. "Thank you," she murmured as I helped her up onto the cold metal slab. A brief glance at my tattered clothes made her whisper, "I'm sorry." There was only one empty compartment left, and out of pity I had let her in, while I myself was forced to crawl on a compartment already occupied by the repulsive, lingering fluids. "Let's just get out of here," I said decisively. "I know a way," she replied, taking my hand and pulling me through a narrow corridor into another chilly room, lined with tables and chairs. "I tried last time," she explained, pointing at a high window set into the ceiling. "But I couldn't get up there. Can you help me?" Without hesitation, I grabbed a pair of bolt cutters, smashed the window, and knelt down to give her a push. Just as she was halfway out, a musty, ancient odor drifted from behind me, and then the door creaked. A staggering figure entered, its steps uneven. The woman didn't notice. She only pleaded with me desperately for help as seconds stretched agonizingly. Suddenly, I felt a firm hand on my shoulder. Dr. Jansen stood there, his voice echoing ominously. "You know," as I said, the question wasn't rhetorical. "Why should we grant you protection?" Before I knew it, I found myself at the front door. It was nighttime. Standing beside me was the same young woman from the clinic, her smile unnaturally wide and revealing too many blood-stained teeth. As she rang the doorbell a second time, the door opened to reveal my wife, her face lighting up with a warm, almost familiar smile. "Doctor," she greeted with a nod. "Persephone," replied the doctor, as he carved a line into my face, almost as if he wore the skin of the young woman as a twisted trophy. They had forced me to watch as he did it. Dr. Jansen shoved me mercilessly, and I staggered into our home. I heard whispered words between my wife and that unsettling creature before the door clicked shut. My wife now stood over me, an arched eyebrow and piercing gaze fixed on me. "Tough day?" she asked, and all I could do was tremble. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up," she said gently, wrapping a soft towel around me, a tenderness I felt I didn't deserve. "They've been missing you for a long time," she murmured as she examined a fresh scar. "They love it when someone makes a difficult decision. I'm glad you did the right thing." "Are you human?" I whispered hesitantly. "For the most part," she answered, "at least where it matters. In time, you'll be like me, but we'll never be like them. We're merely messengers, an intermediate stage." "Do you love me?" I asked almost desperately. "Of course," she replied with a smile. "Otherwise, why would I have given you a choice? I wouldn't have handed you everything in your cradle. The old estate your family left you after your father's accident last year, or made sure that your sister's unsavory boyfriend met an even worse end. I've always watched over you. And what you sacrificed today, you nearly saved your skin by offering up your wife. That was inevitable. But what you gave up for me touched me deeply." The doctor's words echoed in my mind like a dark refrain. "You could have taken your wife's place, and everything that came with it. But we don't need two stewards for our regional empire. She would have been redundant. Dispose of her and prove you're more suited to the role. Otherwise, you'll have to find another sacrifice, and it won't be nearly as simple, nor the reward nearly as great. I think we need to find a child," I said softly. "Not just any child," she replied, before bursting into a mix of tears and smiles. "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you." You could have sacrificed me too. It would have been so much easier. Then I'd know you truly loved me. I promise you, in the end, it'll all be worth it. I could hardly bear to look into her eyes. Are you ready for the final secret? She asked, handing me another envelope. With trembling, clammy hands, I opened it. Inside were the words, "I'm pregnant. In 2 months." They like little kids, she whispered. The child needs to be old enough to, at least somewhat, understand what's happening. Only when it's 3 years old can we... As she continued speaking, I felt something inside me begin to die. A part of myself lost in the dark family secrets that threatened to swallow us all. I must begin by saying that I've never believed in curses or the paranormal. To me, the extravagant tales my family used to spin were nothing more than nonsense. Stories that made me roll my eyes every single time they came up. No one ever really explained what these curses were all about, yet it was always emphasized that they existed. My father, John, was nearly 6.5 feet tall, a man whose imposing stature belied his reserved, almost mysterious nature. He had always been quiet, preferring solitude over socializing. Often, he'd vanish for days, sometimes even weeks, supposedly on official business. I dismissed these absences as pure absurdity. After all, he worked as a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. What on earth could he possibly have to do so far from home? I never doubted his fidelity. It seemed impossible that my father could betray my mother, especially since every time he embarked on one of his field trips, she would retreat into the dim, cool basement of our old Appalachian home. There, she'd sit in hushed, intense conversation with him, a ritual shrouded in secrecy that I could never quite decipher, no matter how many times I tried to stealthily eavesdrop. As I reached 19 and my 20th birthday loomed ever closer, I began noticing small, subtle changes. It was in the little things, like the furtive, almost anxious glances my mother cast in my direction whenever she thought I wasn't watching. There was an unspoken tension in the air, as if our family was guarding a secret too heavy to share openly. The situation took an unexpected turn when my father suddenly started insisting on spending more time with me. The first few times, I was so taken aback by his insistence that I could barely form a coherent reply. I told myself he was simply trying to make up for lost time. I was, after all, his only child. Yet, with each passing week and with my 20th birthday drawing ever nearer, his efforts grew more insistent and oddly personal. Was it coincidence? Could he really be gearing up for the talk? The one about adulthood, life's harsh truths, and the dark family history he'd always hinted at but never fully disclosed. The very thought sent a shiver down my spine. The man who had spent his life carefully guarding his private world now wanted to share everything with me? I could see in his eyes a yearning, a desperate need to reveal something that had haunted him for years. Perhaps he was finally ready to explain the mystery of his long absences, those trips out in the wild. My curiosity, and an almost painful hunger for answers, eventually got the better of me, and when he invited me on a father-son excursion into the park, I agreed with a hesitant nod. On the second day of our trip, a day that also happened to mark my 20th birthday, I decided to make the best of our time together. I had always felt more at home in nature than in the crowded halls of school, and the thought of spending a few days immersed in the crisp mountain air somehow comforted me. While I was packing my gear in the cramped back room of our rented cabin, I spun around only to nearly jump out of my skin when I saw my mother standing just inches from my face. "Mom," I gasped, catching my breath. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." She tilted her head slightly and replied softly, "I'm sorry, Ryan." I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted to see if you needed any help with your packing. I managed a small smile. No, I've got it covered, thanks though. But as she stepped back, her eyes held an unnerving, penetrating look. An unsettling feeling began to churn in my stomach. Is there anything else? I asked, forcing my voice to remain polite despite the disquiet. Her posture straightened, and with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she said, I just wanted you to know that I love you, sweetheart. No matter what happens, never forget that. In our family, we were never the type to exchange affectionate phrases like, I love you, or take care. So I felt awkward as she enveloped me in a firm embrace and patted my back softly. I returned her gesture hesitantly. I love you too, Mom. For what seemed like an eternity, we held each other until she finally released me, giving one last proud, lingering look over my shoulder before leaving the room. In that moment, my mind raced with thoughts. Had my parents been hiding a secret about a looming divorce? Or, God help me, was my father planning to sacrifice me in some ancient, dark ritual in the depths of the forest? I couldn't help but think, with a bitter laugh, that maybe I was destined to be the next victim of an ancestral curse. The day of our departure arrived the day before my birthday. I woke up in high spirits and, admittedly, a bit excited about the adventure ahead. I had always loved camping, and I'd even dreamed of following in my father's footsteps to become a park ranger one day. I got up, took a quick shower, donned my best hiking gear, and joined my father in the kitchen where he was already waiting. His eyes lit up and a wide smile spread across his face. Ready, Ryan? Today you look like a true outdoorsman, he said, his tone both proud and encouraging. I returned his smile weakly. Yeah, Dad. I just need to grab my stuff for the truck. I'm really excited. He nodded, his gaze lingering on me as if measuring some unspoken truth, then turned his attention back to the morning paper. Soon, we climbed into his weathered ranger truck. As we pulled out, my mother came out to bid us farewell. She hugged both of us tightly, murmuring that she loved us. I watched her recede in the rearview mirror, convinced I saw a lone tear glisten on her cheek. Damn it, I thought. That tear made me even more sure that something was terribly off. A little while down the road, I lowered the music and stole a glance at my father. He kept alternating his gaze between me and the road ahead with an intensity that set my nerves on edge. Everything all right, Ryan? He finally asked, his tone laced with concern. I took a deep breath and blurted, Dad, what's all this about? Why are we taking this trip? Why has Mom been acting so strange? And why do you suddenly want to spend so much time with me? My voice trembled as I struggled to put my questions into words. My father sighed heavily, then shook his head as if searching for the right explanation. Before I could press further, he raised his hand, silencing me. Son, I know you feel like your mom and I have been hiding a big secret from you, but it's not as simple as you might think. He paused, ensuring I was still listening, and then continued in a low, deliberate tone. You remember all those stories we used to tell about curses? About the ones passed down through generations? He said. We always spoke about them for a reason, Ryan. Our family isn't exactly ordinary. He went on to explain that many generations ago, one of our ancestors made a desperate pact with a mysterious woman, someone the locals would have called a witch. In exchange for promising the family abundant harvests, prosperity, and fertility, he had vowed his life to her. When the time came for her to claim her due, he refused. Enraged, she cursed his bloodline. Every firstborn child of subsequent generations would bear a terrible fate, something he could not have foreseen. I felt a wave of dizziness as he uttered the word witch, my head spinning with the implications. They say that on the eve of a firstborn's 20th birthday, the curse takes hold, he continued. I've spent years trying to control it. After my first transformation, I learned to keep that beast at bay, at least most of the time. But tonight, on your 20th birthday, the curse will claim its due. You will experience your first transformation. My heart pounded, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you saying I'm going to turn into some kind of monster? I managed to ask in a trembling voice. My father's expression turned grave, his eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and inevitability. It isn't like something out of a horror movie, son. After the first time, we learn to control it. Think of it like a primal hunt in the depths of a dark forest. Only, instead of a rifle, our instincts take over. But on that first night, you won't have any control at all. Before I could fully process his words, we arrived at the ranger station in the heart of the park. A modest building nestled among towering pines and misty ridges. My father informed the station staff that he'd be stepping away briefly to speak with his colleagues, urging me to think of any questions I might have until he returned. As he shut the truck door with a firm thud and disappeared into the building, my thoughts swirled in a chaotic vortex. Was my father under the influence of something? Drugs, perhaps? For a brief moment, I even considered whether he needed help, whether I should force him into rehab or seek psychiatric guidance. But that idea quickly evaporated. Dad was as stubborn as they come, and I suspected I'd inherited a bit of that defiant streak. I sat in silence, the weight of his revelation pressing down on me until he reappeared. Sliding back into the driver's seat, he offered me a strained smile as he started the truck once more. Looks like we'll have the next few nights all to ourselves. A stroke of luck if you ask me, he said, his tone bittersweet. Words failed me as I stared out the window, my mind reeling from everything he'd just revealed. After several long, tense minutes, he broke the silence. Ryan, I know all of this is overwhelming. So many truths to accept at once. But tonight, I need you to trust me. Just for one night. I mustered every bit of courage and met his gaze. So, you're really telling me that tonight, I'm going to wake up with fur and claws, turning into a bloodthirsty creature because of a curse placed long ago by some vengeful witch? My voice cracked with disbelief and fear. Dad, this sounds insane. Please tell me you're not high on something because you're scaring me. Without warning, he slammed on the brakes. The sudden jolt made my heart leap into my throat. He swung open the driver's door with a sharp tug and reached over to yank my door open. His face was now alarmingly close to mine, almost uncomfortably so. Are you questioning my sanity? He growled, his voice deep and menacing. Do you really think I'm under the influence of drugs? His tone left no room for argument. Here is your truth. And as I stared in terror, I could scarcely believe my eyes. Dark, almost mahogany fur began sprouting along his skin, and his once human features twisted into something grotesque. His familiar blue eyes flared a fierce, almost unearthly orange, and a low, guttural snarl rumbled from his throat. I scrambled backward in the truck as he advanced, his growls intensifying with every step. Then, with a sudden savage lunge, he bared his teeth and sank them into me. Tonight, you'll see, he snarled, that you are just like me. And in that heart-stopping moment, as terror and disbelief collided within me, I realized that the legacy of our cursed bloodline was no myth at all, but a living, breathing nightmare that had just become my reality.